There's a lot of misconceptions out there about crypto. If you're in a traditional finance setting, and don't get me wrong, perceptions are changing, but for a very, very long time, it was very much still the talking points of some of the big bank executives where blockchain is a revolutionary technology, crypto is not good. So I'll have to be, unfortunately, perhaps a little too scant with details to your liking. But what I will say is there is definitely a path forward to put these assets on chain. It's absolutely doable from a regulatory and compliance perspective. You just have to be extra buttoned up when you go down that path. But we are actively working towards going down that path, and we'll have more to share soon enough.
What's your vision of tokenization and what we could see in the next 5 years, for example? Like, because like 10 years, 15 years, 20 years seems like way...
Yeah, it's a long time.
Could you explain a bit like what you're doing with BlackRock? Is it like a partnership? Are you using BlackRock as any other type of real-world asset type of solution? So yeah, what's going on with BlackRock basically? Hello à tous l'équipe, j'espère que vous allez bien. Aujourd'hui on se retrouve pour une nouvelle vidéo. Cette fois-ci j'ai le plaisir de recevoir Ian, qui est tout simplement le Chief Strategy Officer de Ondo, donc qui a une place assez clé chez Ondo. Ça va être l'occasion de parler de ce qui se passe chez Ondo parce qu'on a vu que c'était un protocole qui était très intéressant, dont beaucoup parlaient, notamment sur la narrative Real World Assets. Et je me suis dit que, en fait, on maîtrise pas tous le fondat de ce projet. On ne sait pas exactement nécessairement ce qui se passe en interne ou même quelles sont un petit peu les perspectives d'avenir sur le protocole. Donc, ça va être l'occasion de poser toutes ces questions et on commence tout de suite. Hello, Ian. How is it going?
Good morning.
It's a bit, I would say, late here, but where are you based?
Bay Area. So
Okay, very nice. So yeah, I'm very glad to have you today, especially for the French-speaking community, because a lot of people are very interested in real-world assets. A lot of people heard about Ondo. A lot of people kind of put it Ondo in their narrative play for this cycle. And I thought it would be very interesting to explain what's going on Ondo, because I think people are super hyped about real-world assets. They're super hyped about Ondo. They are hyped about your relationship with BlackRock, for example, and everything. But I think there are some confusion or things that could be confusing sometimes. So I think this is a huge opportunity for you and for the community to understand what's going on at Ondo. So maybe first, can you introduce yourself and basically explain what you were doing before Ondo, because I do believe you have like a very interesting background when it comes to digital assets and tokenization.
Yeah, of course. And thank you so much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. I joined Ondo as their Chief Strategy Officer a little over 5 months ago. So within Ondo, I am responsible for strengthening the ties with big institutional partners and for managing a few strategic projects. Before Ondo, I was a partner at McKinsey & Company for a little over 8 years. McKinsey & Company, the big strategy consulting business. There, I was primarily advising traditional financial services executives on what to do about digital assets. Like, first and foremost, what are they? What are they not? Because there's still a lot of misconception about them. Addressing those, and then ideally, ultimately, getting them excited enough to do specific things in the digital asset space. So I did that quite a long time, actually. I started doing digital asset work within McKinsey back in 2016. Back then, it was a lot of blockchain, not crypto. In fact, I advised a couple of French banks on it. Actually,
really?
That was my first project. I was doing it for French banks. And since then, like in 2017, 2018, we started doing some actual crypto work with some of the L1s and big protocols, primarily on their go-to-market efforts. Like, how do you get big institutions to sign up to actual crypto products? 2019, there was nothing happening. It was a complete dead zone. And then in 2020, things changed pretty dramatically, at least within the McKinsey context, after DeFi summer and after the announcement that PayPal did in Q4 of 2020 when they were going to launch crypto trading in their app. And all of a sudden, corporate America woke up and said, wait, crypto's not dead. And since then, it's been full-time working on those digital assets projects. So I've gotten quite a few reps on the topic over the years, even though I wasn't necessarily working in crypto. I got to focus a lot over the years on tokenization. Like, tokenization's been around for a while, right? And you had a lot of false starts, I would say.
Yeah. It's been a long journey, because I think people were dreaming of tokenization for a long time now. It's it seems that it took like way more time than expected, you know?
Oh, for sure. And I think, there's a couple of reasons for that. I think back in 2017, 16, 18, doesn't really matter, when interest rates were super low, even back in 2020.
Yeah.
The business case to do tokenization of an asset was dramatically different because fundamentally, when you want to tokenize an asset, I think one of the key benefits is you allow it to move 24/7. Like you increase your capital efficiency. But if capital doesn't cost anything and is close to 0% interest rate, the benefit of that, not that great. But if capital is at a 5.5%, 6% opportunity, the ability to do an instant repo versus a T+1 or a 12-hour repo is pretty dramatic. And so all of a sudden you saw a very big shift, at least in the traditional finance world, to the topic of tokenization. I think the problem with that view, though, was still that people view tokenization as an efficiency play, right? If I put it on rails, I can move my money faster. I don't need as many back office, middle office processes. It's all going to be great, right? But again, the problem with that mindset is you're not going to get any of those efficiencies unless you achieve scale. You're not going to get scale if you don't think about the distribution of your tokenized assets. How am I going to get a tokenized asset into the hand of an investor that actually cares about it being on crypto rails? And they care that it's on crypto rails because the utility and benefit of that tokenized asset is better than what they can get on traditional rails. And that mindset is unfortunately pretty absent with most big traditional financial institutions. But that's what attracted me to Ondo in the first place, because they're really taking a distribution first approach where the entire point is, let's take traditional financial assets, let's put them on public crypto rails, right? Not private chains, and get them into the hands of crypto native investors on as many chains as possible and grow the pie that way.
What did you learn by talking with all the institutional, I would say, actors, companies, whatever, whenever you were working for McKinsey and also when you arrived at Ondo? Because you mentioned that a lot of them didn't really understood what was going on.
Right.
And also, when it comes to crypto, it felt also that the environment was not mature enough so far. So they were kind of right in some ways. So what did you learn from your experience at McKinsey? Because a lot of things happened like behind the scene, and this is something we haven't been able to, I would say, hear of most of the time. So yeah.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it almost makes me wonder where to start. Because there's a lot to cover there.
Yeah, because 8 years at McKinsey is like huge. I wasn't expecting that.
Yeah, no, it's a little too long. But I had a good time. There's a lot of misconceptions out there about crypto. If you're in a traditional finance setting, and don't get me wrong, perceptions are changing, but for a very, very long time, it was very much still the talking points of some of the big bank executives where blockchain is a revolutionary technology, crypto is not good, right? And so I think really helping them mature their mindset of you can't actually have a blockchain without crypto. That was a very big mindset shift in dispelling the notion that the only purpose of crypto and crypto rails is for money laundering and all these sorts of things was the biggest battle, quite frankly. Because, I mean, to be fair to them, it's not like the traditional media coverage of crypto is always in a positive light, right? And that's the channels that these companies and executives consume. Now, I do think now starts to feel a little bit different in a post-FTX world because a lot of the excess, again, has been flushed out. And you're starting to have the likes of Larry Fink and other big executives really understand what this stuff is about and go on CNBC and a bunch of the traditional media channels and say, this stuff is real and it's not just blockchain, it's actual crypto, right? Bitcoin is the digital gold store of value.
To speak about crypto, so then they are like, oh, he's a genius, so this is probably like a good thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, Larry Fink's respect in the traditional world is enormous for a good reason. And so people do take notice when a company like BlackRock starts making actual moves in the space and starts putting traditional financial products on crypto rails. I think the other thing that always helped throughout the years is whenever a company in the crypto space went public with some of their financials. We saw this when Coinbase went public. And all of a sudden people looked at Coinbase's results and were like, oh my goodness, they're making a lot of money.
Even Tether and Bitfinex and Circle, and it's huge.
I can guarantee you Tether's financial results are being discussed at board meetings of traditional financial companies.
For sure, because like the amount of revenue in profit is huge.
It's huge. And over the years, half the battle was, why is a stable coin better than a cash product? Right. And I think people are finally starting to get it. But most of these executives have never engaged in DeFi, engaged with the smart contract. They don't know what a MetaMask wallet is. And until you actually engage with this stuff, it doesn't click, right? You don't know why this is so different. But increasingly, it doesn't matter anymore, because you can just point to the Tethers of the world and say, even if you don't get it, there's a lot of money to be made. So you probably want to take this stuff seriously.
And some people will get it because when you think about it, BlackRock has been quite big on going and moving forward with crypto, especially with the ETF and with like their tokenized fund and everything. And when you think about their position, the first mover advantage is quite huge, and they have like a lot of profits to be made whenever you're like BlackRock, because if you're moving first, then the other ones are like, maybe we should not go. It's like money laundering and everything. But at the end of the day, BlackRock is getting everything and making sure it kind of gets like not a monopoly situation, but, you know, a big position in the ecosystems as big as they have like in TradFi maybe.
Yeah, well, I think it's very early for the space, right, ultimately. But having a company like BlackRock move into the space is obviously pretty monumental. Whenever BlackRock does something, I mean, just look at their Bitcoin ETF. They are the largest now by far. And in finance, you know, liquidity begets liquidity. If you're the first and you build up a certain scale, it is going to be a lot easier to keep that scale. Just look at Tether, just look at USDC, just look at the original stablecoin. So I think BlackRock is making all the right moves. And personally, sitting within Ondo, I think it further just strengthens the narrative that we're going after, as well as some of the products that we've launched in the past. Because when you look what BlackRock actually launched on chain with their BUIDL product, it was I don't want to say an exact copy, but it was pretty close to what we did with OUSG from a product structure perspective. And so it just kind of was a very interesting proof point for us that we're on the right path, building out actual products and structures and innovations that then big asset managers are probably going to replicate in a fast-following fashion.
Cette vidéo vous est présentée en partenariat avec dYdX. dYdX est LA solution décentralisée qui vous permet de trader les principales crypto-monnaies de manière liquide sur mobile et ordinateur. Contrairement à la majorité des exchanges, vous n'avez pas besoin de vous KYC et vous récupérez la majorité des frais que vous payez. Plus de 60 000 personnes utilisent déjà dYdX et j'en fais partie, alors qu'attendez-vous? Scannez le QR code sur votre écran ou utilisez le lien dans la description pour créer votre compte avec un simple wallet et profitez de 5% de réduction sur vos frais. Allez, on repart sur l'interview.
Maybe can you explain what Ondo is about and also the products that are available? Because I think a lot of people are aware of Ondo and its narrative, but sometimes a bit less when it comes to the products that you launched and that are available. So can you introduce Ondo and explain why it has like a lot of interest?
Yeah, happy to. So the mission of Ondo overall is to build an open and accessible financial system through services and infrastructure all built on public blockchain. That's a little bit of a mouthful, so I'm going to try to break it into its separate pieces. On the asset side of things, that's kind of what we're most known for. Right? Ondo's whole thing is we take traditional financial assets and put them on crypto rails and make them available to a global audience. The two assets that we're most known for, one's called OUSG. That one is a permission product, so you have to KYC with us in order to hold it. It can only transfer on-chain between those KYC'd entities. It is a product that you have to be a qualified purchaser for. Basically, it means big institutions or high net worth individuals with a considerable amount of wealth.
So VC, family office, wealthy individual, big corporations.
That's right. So any of those big institutional entities that wants to keep funds on chain but actually earn yield on it, that's what OUSG is a very good product for. OUSG is also interesting because you can still immediately redeem into stablecoins. The liquidity profile of that product is pretty interesting. But that one, it's like big institutions that want to earn yield on chain and have an easy off ramp. The other product that we have is called USDY. We refer to that one as a yield coin. It looks and smells a little bit like a stable coin, but it is structured in a very different way in the sense that it pays yield on chain, 5.35% right now, if I'm not mistaken. And it has much better investor protections than a stable coin. Most people don't realize when you hold a stable coin, these things are actually not designed to be bankruptcy remote. You don't hold a security interest in the collateral. You hold a claim against the issuer. And the transparency on some of these reserves, as we all know, is questionable. These are all the things that USDY tries to improve on. It's designed in a bankruptcy remote way, security interest in the collateral, daily, there's a lot of transparency in what the collateral is. So USDY travels permissionlessly on, at this point, 7 different blockchains, I believe.
So USDY is more for retail investors and DeFi, and
Correct.
OUSG is more for institutional actors, right?
Correct. And USDY is available to non-US persons.
Okay.
So that's it on the asset side, really starting with tokenized treasuries in order to provide a product that in essence is better than stablecoins and go after that, AUM. But there's also a services and infrastructure component, right? And that one doesn't get as much recognition, or people are less familiar with. On the services side of things, Ondo Finance originally developed the Flux Finance protocol that has since been transferred to the Ondo DAO and Flux Foundation. But it was a compound V2 fork that essentially, so a DeFi protocol that we made that could support a permissioned collateral asset like OUSG, because traditional DeFi protocols don't really work with those types of assets, right? They will work only fully permissionlessly. But Flux Finance was designed almost as a proof of concept of how a DeFi protocol can work with these permissioned assets. And so ultimately what that ended up being was a repo market. Treasuries are very popular in part because you can take a repo against it. A repo just means that you pledge the treasury as a collateral asset and get cash against it. And you can do that very flexibly so that you have better liquidity.
So what you mean is that OUSG could not be implemented, integrated into avec, Morpho, and everything. So you had to build your own DeFi platform in some way.
Yeah, technically these assets can. It's just a little more tricky for those protocols to do it. And so when we launched OUSG, Flux Finance was launched pretty shortly thereafter in order to make sure that the asset had sufficient utility as collateral. Because overall, this is where a lot of the tokenization efforts, I think, run afoul. You tokenize an asset, you put a traditional asset on chain, but then what, right? You have to give it actual utility in the form of integrations into DeFi protocols, because otherwise it's hard to make a case that tokenized asset is better than a traditional asset. And so in order to facilitate the utility of these assets, Ondo Finance is building out some services that give better utility and liquidity to the assets that we
to match what is available in the TradFi, right? Because a lot of people in TradFi use, their stocks or treasury bonds and everything to borrow more money on the other side and use those as collateral. 100%. So if it's not available on the blockchain, why would you go on the blockchain, right?
100%. And I think that's one of the key gaps that exists right now overall for tokenization. If you take a big step back, and it kind of maps to what Ondo's doing, but the problems that exist right now in tokenization, I think, are number one, there's not enough interesting assets on chain, right? There's some stable coins, there's crypto, there's a little bit of tokenized treasuries, but that's about it. There's no other publicly listed securities. There's no stocks, there's no bonds, there's no ETFs. And that limits the utility. That's a problem. So that's why Ondo has Ondo Global Markets. It's an initiative that we launched in February, where the goal is to take publicly listed securities that have deep liquidity in traditional markets and put those on chain. Second big problem is even the assets that exist on chain, it's a little unclear what you can do with them. They don't really have enough utility, right? So then the value proposition of a tokenized asset that's why Ondo has a focus on services, and that's why Ondo originally developed a Flux Finance. And we are working on other types of services that increase the utility of the assets that we tokenize. And then last but not least, the third problem is the infrastructure to put these assets on chain in an omni-chain fashion is pretty poor. It's really challenging. Like particularly for a traditional asset manager to expect to start putting their asset on not just Ethereum, but then like 10
Baisse,
different blockchains.
Arbitrum, Solana, yeah.
Nightmare, right? These guys have no clue how to do that. And so there's a need to build better infrastructure that makes the issuance of these assets in an omni-chain fashion a lot more straightforward. And there's also a need to make the transfers between these various blockchains a lot more seamless, but with institutional grade security. And again, those are some of the infrastructure products that Ondo is building.
Understood.
Avant de poursuivre cette vidéo, je t'invite tout simplement à rejoindre mon Discord dans lequel tu peux retrouver plus de 10 000 traders actifs. Dans ce Discord, on parle de nombreuses choses, notamment on va tout simplement partager nos analyses, nos graphiques, sur quoi on spécule, les différents airdrops qu'on farm, les news en temps réel qui sont partagées par exemple sur Twitter ou sur différents sites. Enfin bref, c'est vraiment un moyen d'être à jour sur ce qui se passe dans l'écosystème. Et en plus de ça, sur ce Discord-là, je vais partager tout simplement pas mal de données et pas mal de choses que je surveille personnellement, donc des données qui sont importantes à mes yeux et tout simplement moi personnellement ce que je surveille au quotidien. Donc ça permet vraiment d'avoir un suivi en temps réel de moi ce que je regarde et comment je me positionne dans l'écosystème. D'ailleurs, tu peux retrouver mes performances de 2022 et 2023 sur tous les trades que j'ai partagés gratuitement et publiquement. Donc ici, tu as absolument tout le détail avec les positions disponibles de manière transparente, mes positions actives, mon folio ainsi que tous les trades que personnellement je prends de mon côté avec le suivi de comment je déplace mon stop loss, comment j'ajuste mon risque, comment je me positionne, etc. J'espère que ça vous plaira. Tout est gratuit. Je vous invite à rejoindre. Tout sera en description, en commentaire épinglé. Et maintenant, place à la vidéo.
I think there is like an elephant in the room when it comes to on the global markets. I think this is one of the feature or product that people are probably the most hyped about. Can you talk about it? Because from my perspective, as someone that was not following Ondo very closely until like a few months ago, whenever I digged into it, it seems like the most interesting side. And a lot of people are not aware of what it is, how it should work, when it will be available and everything. So maybe could you explain what do you have in mind when it comes to this product and what we can expect from it?
Yeah, it's a great question. Ondo Global Markets, I think, truly has the potential to transform what people do on public blockchains. And so I understand. Yeah.
This is, to me, this is very exciting because this is something I've been waiting a long time, right. Especially when it comes to, like, right now we are evolving in a bull environment, but whenever you switch to like a bear environment or like you have like an environment that is quite different from other cycles because, for example, from a TradFi perspective, we've seen a lot of things happening AI-wise. And in crypto, it is like less developed and you cannot really invest in those companies through, I would say, your crypto money. So
yeah, no, I agree. Now, most things that are truly revolutionary are also a little challenging to pull off in the right way.
I can understand because I guess a lot of people have been trying to solve this problem of having TradFi stuff on blockchain, right?
Yeah. So I'll have to be, unfortunately, perhaps a little too scant with details to your liking. But what I will say is there is definitely a path forward to put these assets on chain. It's absolutely doable from a regulatory and compliance perspective. You just have to be extra buttoned up when you go down that path. But we are actively working towards going down that path, and we'll have more to share soon enough. What gets me personally excited about the Ondo Global Markets initiative and platform is, to your point, once you can start putting these public securities on chain, think of your popular stocks, think of your S&P 500 ETF, think of other types of products, right? You can really start to do things that people have imagined of doing but have never been able to actually pull off. Like, all of a sudden, you can cross-collateralize a position that you have, right? You can have both your crypto and your equities, your stocks in one place, and you can use both assets as a funding source for whatever type of additional position that you want to take. You can think about interesting interplays between the various asset classes. For example, if you say, hey, I have a lot of staked ETH, But instead of accumulating, I just like to put the yield of that into the S&P 500 ETF, or the other way around. You want to put the dividends that you get on your S&P 500 ETF into Ethereum. You can programmatically start thinking about products that facilitate stuff like that. And so when we think about on the global markets, I'd say our mission and our thinking is not just let's put these assets on chain and see what happens, right? But we'll come with a platform and a plan that actually addresses the utility of these assets right off the bat and will allow people to do very interesting.
So on the global market is about having stocks, basically ETFs and all sort of TradFi things on blockchain. Do you have any more details to share, especially when it comes to hours of trading, liquidity, those kind of, I would say, topics that are hot topics when it comes to on the global markets? Do you have any information to share about that? Because on my end, I'm like, whenever on the global markets is available, can I trade stocks like 24/7? Right. Is there any limits to use it or to buy it or to sell it? Do you need to KYC? Those kind of things that comes in people's minds whenever we talk about on the global markets.
Yeah, I think those are all fair questions, and obviously some of the things that we need to work through. In fact, it's not super dissimilar to when stablecoins first came around. Because now people, like with stable coins, you can move them 24/7. It's quite easy to do. But the banking rails, particularly in the US, I know Europe is a little bit different, but in the US, the banking rails are incredibly slow and do not operate 24/7. And so you had the same type of liquidity mismatch. But that liquidity mismatch really only happens when you want to go from a stable coin back into cash, right? When you want to do the actual redemption, maybe the minting. And so similarly for on the global markets, I think there's a little bit of a mismatch between the hours that the market is open and to when some of these assets may actually move on chain. But it is solvable because the traditional financial markets, I mean, think about platforms like Robinhood. They allow trading outside market hours already. What ends up happening on the back end is you just have a market maker that's willing to take the side of that trade, right?
And the risk.
And the risk associated with it. That's why people pay trading fees, right? But a very similar implementation is possible in an on the global markets context. At the same time, once you put an equity asset like a stock or an ETF on chain, there are use cases that will be enabled 24/7, even when your ability to redeem an asset against cash may not be 24/7. Maybe there's ways to do a redemption against stable coins 24/7, which for all intents and purposes for people would be sufficient. The other thing too is even when the markets are closed, you can still use your asset as collateral in a DeFi protocol if you want to, right? And so I think the liquidity mismatch between traditional markets and on-chain markets is there. It's not easy to solve, but people sometimes maybe focus almost too much on it because you don't fully need to solve that liquidity mismatch to give real utility to these assets on chain as collateral. The downside of the construct may be that depending on what you want to redeem against, you may have to wait a day. But in that sense, what I'm describing is still far better than what you can get on a traditional brokerage platform anyway.
Yeah. So I would say that the UX would be better in many ways. And maybe TradFi people may be shocked about what's achievable on the blockchain because they are used to, I would say, slow rails. I think crypto is in some ways TradFi on steroids. And if you bring like the TradFi stuff on blockchain, they might be surprised of what's possible. What's your vision of tokenization and what we could see in the next 5 years, for example? Like, because like 10 years, 15 years, 20 years seems like way.
Yeah, it's a long time.
But yeah, what's your vision on that? And is there anything we don't expect from like a retail perspective?
Yeah, it's a great question. I feel like I've been in crypto long enough to not make any predictions on what the next 5 years are going to hold. Honestly, let alone the next year. But no, I think it's fair to try to think 3 years out, to be honest.
A cycle, 4 years.
Yeah, like a cycle. And, to your point, a bull market is very different than a bear market. I think the benefit of what Ondo's doing is that it's going to be relevant both in a bull market and a bear market, quite frankly. Like in a bear market, when crypto prices are a lot more depressed, there's maybe less need for borrowing and margin and leverage. People are still going to want to have exposure to stocks. Stocks perform just fine in the bear market, typically, right? Unless there's
The drawdown is way better. I mean,
it's way
lower.
better. Yeah. So once Ondo Global Markets is up and running, I think that'll be a super relevant product, particularly in bear markets. But then in bull markets, people want more leverage, more margin,
more crypto,
more crypto too. But the funding source to get that crypto may very well be some of the tokenized treasury products that we have, or even the stocks and ETFs that they have accumulated if we design things in the right way. So I think the next 3 years are going to be interesting. The emphasis of what product is going to be hot may shift a little bit depending on the macro environment, but I think this overall move towards having more assets on chain and giving them utility is pretty inevitable. At the same time, I'd also highlight that one of the reasons why the first tokenized asset was so successful, and I mean cash in the form of stablecoins, was because you could move it around 24/7. There's a lot of people out there globally that wanted access to the US dollar that had trouble getting that access. And because this thing runs on crypto rails, it's programmatic, meaning that you can engage with these types of smart contracts, which means that you disintermediate particular entities that otherwise are charging fees. So you get a source of yield on these stable coins that otherwise is unavailable to cash, right? And I know we can have a long discussion about the source of yield and the funny games that people play, but fundamentally, in the right protocol and right setting, there is still a traditional revenue stream, either in the form of people paying interest on their loans or on their borrows, or in the form of trading fees on swaps that are being disintermediated and passed on to the holders of a digital asset. Similarly, there are plenty of revenue pools in traditional finance that will become available in some shape or form once you start tokenizing equities, stocks, and other public securities. The whole concept of securities lending and margin are huge revenue pools in traditional finance. And so those types of revenue pools you're going to be able to tap into once these assets are on chain and provide for an additional source of yield on your assets that right now you don't have access.
I wanted to question you about the interest rates from the Federal Reserve and also the SEB. In case, they will probably decrease the interest rates in the next few months or years. I think ECB already decreased a bit their interest rates.
Yep.
The Fed is about probably to do the same by the end of this year or next year. Are you expecting any impact on Ondo, its relevance, its business model, its revenues, all those kind of things? Because that might be something that, I don't know, even the stablecoin issuer might be worried about. You know, I've been talking with Jeremy Allaire about it, and he mentioned that if the interest rates goes down, then the cost of money is lower, then people tends to use more than for money, and the velocity of the money is increasing, which generates more use of the money, and so more fees in many ways. So what are your perspectives on the interest rates declining and affecting maybe on those activities?
Yeah. I think when you look at, and I'm glad you asked the question because I'm getting it more and more, quite frankly. There's almost this perception of like, oh, but you offer a yield coin. What happens if the yield goes down, right? The relevance of your product may decrease. I actually think it's the complete opposite, quite frankly. When interest rates go down, and this is similar to what Jeremy's saying, I guess, is the need for stuff like borrow, margin, all these sorts of things typically goes up, right? When capital becomes cheaper, leverage becomes more popular. There is no better funding tool for these types of things than a treasury when you look at traditional market. So I'm very bullish the concept of using tokenized treasuries in these types of trades and environments, which only is going to grow when interest rate actually drop. So I think the demand for products paradoxically almost may actually increase when interest rates go down for the Ondo products. Also, even when they go down to like 4%, 3%, whatever, 3% is still better than 0%. And people forget the investor protections that our products come with because retail money typically doesn't think that way. Institutional money does. And so the investor protections that the Ondo products have that are far better than stablecoins, honestly, you're not going to go anywhere. On our business model, fundamentally, the beauty of Ondo is any yield that is being generated, more or less all of it is being passed to the end user, right?
So what's what's your fees on the products you offer right now? Because people talk about the yields, but people talk less, I would say, about the fees, maybe because they are low.
Yeah, they are very low. Like we have the ability to charge a 15 bips. 15 bips is 0.15% management fee on these assets. But we've decided to waive all of it until at least the end of this year.
Okay.
And so, but the fees regardless are very low. 0.15% is a hell of a lot lower than what a stablecoin issuer actually charges you right now, which is around, 500 bips, 5%, give or take. And when I think about the impact of lowering interest rates, I think it's a very big problem for stablecoin issuers because they need that revenue pool in order to finance their business. Now, I don't mean to imply that these stablecoin issuers don't have other sources of revenue, and there's particularly one very big stablecoin issuer that will do just fine.
Maybe they'll just buy Bitcoin just like Tether did.
Yeah. Although that will change the risk profile of the stablecoin, I'm sure.
But this is interesting because their companies have reserve their own profits that are on their treasury, and they invest in it. They invest it so that whenever the cost of money is very low, they have some exposure to assets that goes high in these environments. So I think that's why also Tether goes on this way, because they will not get billions of revenues every year if the interest rate goes down.
I think fundamentally the business model of a stablecoin issuer is much more fraught in a low interest rate environment than the Ondo business model.
I wanted to have your perspectives on your relationship with BlackRock, because I kind of feel that your relationship with BlackRock is great. It enables you to offer very interesting services.
Yep.
But it feels that sometimes people are a bit overestimating your relationship with BlackRock. So could you explain a bit what you're doing with BlackRock? Is it a partnership? Are you using BlackRock as any other type of reward asset type of solution? So what's going on with BlackRock basically?
Well, just like when speaking about any very big asset manager and financial services company, I will be mindful not to speak for them. But from an Ondo perspective, we are very appreciative of the relationship that we have with BlackRock. To your point, it's very good. When BlackRock moved or launched BUIDL on-chain in a implementation that was very similar to OUSG, we immediately saw that potential and decided to move the backing of OUSG into this BUIDL to then also start leveraging some of the infrastructure that BlackRock was developing in partnership with a few others. To date, I think we're by far the majority holder of the BUIDL, or the biggest holder of the BUIDL product. I forget what exactly it is. It's anywhere around 40 to 45%. But I think it's a very symbiotic relationship, right? Because, BlackRock is pretty fast moving for such a large entity. These guys manage $10 trillion, give or take. Imagine that. Imagine the scale. But they're still able to do very innovative things and move very quickly. So I deeply respect them and applaud them for it. At the same time, there's limits to what these guys are going to be able to do given the sheer size that they're operating in. And so Ondo as a company, I think, will be a little bit more nimble. You've seen that with some of the product features that we launched and some of the minimums that we have on OUSG versus BUIDL and the like. So we've been able to iterate a little bit faster on some product features while leveraging the infrastructure of BlackRock. I think we've also been quicker at taking our product a little bit more omni-chain and integrating various products into the broader DeFi ecosystem and having relationships with those partners. But that's brilliant for a player like BlackRock because we still get to put the backing of some of our products into the BlackRock products. So as we grow, BlackRock, right? And so the relationship is extraordinarily symbiotic. We get along super well with them. We'll probably have a few more announcements in that regard coming up pretty soon-ish. I'd say I deeply respect BlackRock, love working with them. More to come.
2 questions regarding that. Is BlackRock a shareholder of Ondo, at least the company behind it? And don't you think that if it's not the case, don't you think that BlackRock could end up like being the biggest competitor of Ondo, or is it not part of our plan? Because, at the end of the day, they're kind of going through the same path in some ways, or at least maybe they might have the ability to do so.
Yeah, I don't see BlackRock as a competitor, to be honest. I see, like, taking a bit of a step back in the whole tokenized RWA space, I personally think it's far too early to be referring to others as competitors. Because really what we're trying to do in this stage of the industry is grow the overall size of all of these assets combined, right? Now, I understand people's perception sometimes when they look at Ondo versus others is like, oh my God, they're competing. And it is true that our products differ. But when you then make the analysis of how our products stack up to some others, I am very confident in that our products are by far the best in the market. When the stuff you want to look at is how are the investor protections? How is the yield? What's the cost structure that Ondo's charging versus some others? What's the liquidity profile of an asset? So if I'm holding one of the Ondo assets, how quickly can I get into stable coins? For how much? How quickly can I subscribe in stable coins and for how much? Lower minimums tends to be better for a wide variety of investors. When am I getting my interest paid? Is it daily versus monthly? Where can I use my assets? Is it in DeFi protocols or is it simply a buy and hold? How many chains is this asset on? So those are all interesting dimensions to look at for any type of tokenized RWA product. And on nearly all of those dimensions, I think Ondo wins. So, and I think there's limits to what a company like BlackRock can also do on those dimensions. And so that's why I think the relationship with BlackRock is so symbiotic, because we can do things that BlackRock can't, and BlackRock can set up things that we can't.
They can't technically, or from a regulation perspective?
From a relationship perspective and an institutional perspective, right? And BlackRock has a scale that Ondo still does not, and will not have quite for a long time. I don't think Ondo's going to be managing $10 trillion of assets anytime soon, unfortunately. But so I just think it's a very symbiotic relationship. And I hope that you're going to see some of those symbiotic relationships in the very near future with the broader asset management space on-chain as well.
Cette vidéo vous est présentée en partenariat avec dYdX. dYdX est la solution décentralisée qui vous permet de trader les principales crypto-monnaies de manière liquide sur mobile et ordinateur. Contrairement à la majorité des exchanges, vous n'avez pas besoin de vous KYC et vous récupérez la majorité des frais que vous payez. Plus de 60 000 personnes utilisent déjà dYdX et j'en fais partie, alors qu'attendez-vous? Scannez le QR code sur votre écran ou utilisez le lien dans la description pour créer votre compte avec un simple wallet et profitez de 5% de réduction sur vos frais. Allez, on repart sur l'interview.
I wanted to talk about Ondo's roadmap because from my perspective, it's not 100% clear. And I think a lot of people are willing to know what's going to happen in the next few months. I mean, by the end of the year or even next year. You mentioned that Ondo global markets is not going to happen soon, but at least we might have more information very soon.
Yeah.
What can you talk about? What can you say about the roadmap and what might happen in the next few months?
Yeah. And I don't mean to imply there's nothing happening. You won't know anything about on the global markets. I think everything's happening in the background, and soon enough we'll be ready to announce more things. Specifically for this year, though, some of the things that you can expect, I think are continued innovations and go-to-market efforts on the products that we already have. So with regards to OUSG and USDY, there's a few more chain integrations that are on the way and that are coming, other integrations into DeFi protocols that are coming. We're obviously still thinking through how to improve the liquidity profile of these assets. Right now, we offer subscriptions and redemptions against USDC. There are obviously other stablecoins out there that would be nice to redeem against and do subscriptions with. So more on that soon. As I mentioned, some of the issues that exist right now is the ability to go between various blockchains. Ondo already has its own bridge, but I think more to come on that still this year on how we're thinking about the future of those bridges and going in between chains. So there's quite a few things happening. I think we'll lots of stuff to share still this year and obviously next year.
Interesting. Do you plan to release products that are, I would say, more dedicated to retail investors? Because it feels that sometimes the focus is a lot on the institutional actors and companies. So do you plan to release specific products for retail investors, or is it like just like the natural path going from institutional products and then making sure they are like in some ways available through proxies to retail investors?
Well, I mean, I'd say we already have products that are available to retail investors with USDY, right? You can absolutely get that outside the US. On the global markets, we'll have a focus on both institutional and retail investors. So I think one of the reasons I personally got excited about Ondo is that Ondo is doing both, right? If you think about the stuff that we've already done, Ondo, I think, is the only company out there that has experience in doing distribution of traditional securities to institutional investors, doing distribution to retail investors, of having built DeFi protocols, having built actual infrastructure, of just tailoring their products and services to a very broad ecosystem. And I think we'll continue to do that in the future.
I got asked a lot of time by the community regarding the token. People were kind of, I would say, mentioning what's the utility of the token, what's the role of the token, how does the governance works, and all those kind of things. Can you say anything about it?
I'm going to have to disappoint on that question, I'm afraid, because anything related to the token is a specific remit of the foundation and the Ondo DAO. So I'm afraid I can't address that. So,
who should we ask to those kind of questions? Like some people working at the foundation. So how can we reach them, basically?
That's a great question. The Ondo Finance operates very independently from the foundation, but my understanding is that there are specific social media channels that people can put those questions in, and they ultimately will get answered.
Understood. Thank you very much for your time, Ian. Do you have any last words maybe for the French-speaking community?
Oh boy, I wish I could say something in French. I'm technically Belgian, so I should be able to. Yeah, but my French is god-awful. So I apologize for that. But no, it's been an absolute pleasure to be on this podcast. I hope it was helpful. I hope I was able to share what Ondo's up to and what Ondo stands for in an understandable format and fashion, which is why I really like these types of engagements. There's a lot of people in the space sometimes get a little bit too jargony or hung up with specifics, hung up with the tech. I think fundamentally why I'm excited about Ondo is because we're taking traditional financial products and putting them on crypto rails and making them available to an audience that otherwise will struggle to get access to it. And that is one of the key things that I think one of the benefits of the crypto ecosystem that often gets overlooked. But you go talk to anyone who is in a country where they're desperately looking for better financial products and access, and they will tell you product market fit for crypto in their eyes is very easy and established.
Yeah, I will add to that I'm expecting a lot from Ondo for 2025.
That's good. I like high expectations.
I'm expecting a lot. I do think that when people talk a lot about infra, about the infrastructure and everything, VL1, VL2s and everything, I do feel that it's getting more and more mature and that we're getting decent performance. And now the question is about having the best applications available with real use cases, interesting use cases and everything. We have interesting stuff and very mature stuff when it comes to lending, borrowing, or trading, even in a decentralized manner. But I do feel that having TradFi stuff on chain might enable a lot of more use cases that make sense and kind of bridge crypto to the real world, which would unleash very interesting people in my head. So thank you very much for your time, Ian, and looking forward to having on the global markets available very soon, hopefully.
Me too. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.